All right, today we're diving into one of the biggest and definitely one of the highest stakes games in all of global trade. Now, this isn't a game of chance. It's a game of strategy, deception, and immense financial pressure. And it's played out in boardrooms, factories, and shipping ports all across the globe.
And see, this game isn't played on a field. It's played out on shipping manifests and in customs declarations. The prize isn't some shiny trophy. It's the chance to avoid billions with a B of dollars in taxes. And the whole thing really kicks off with a number so massive, it's almost hard to wrap your head around.
6,000%. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. Imagine a tax that increases the cost of something you're trying to sell not by 10% or even 100%, but by a factor of 60. That's the kind of number that doesn't just, influence a business decision. It creates an entirely new reality.
And that brings us right to the heart of our story today. These things called punitive tariffs and the super elaborate game of cat and mouse they create between huge global companies and governments. So let's break down exactly how this game is played. So first, why even play this game? Well, the motivation is incredibly simple. These aren't just taxes in the normal sense. They're more like financial walls, and they're designed to be nearly impossible to climb over, fundamentally changing the economics of an entire industry. I mean, just look at the sheer scale of these financial walls. We are not talking about small tweaks here. For garlic, the tariff can get as high as 6,000%. For solar panels, over 500%. When a tax is that high, it's not just another business expense. It can be an existential threat. And that creates this powerful incentive, a kind of gravitational pull, really, to find any way you can around that wall. So, how do these companies actually try to get around these walls? Well, it's not always simple deception. There's a whole playbook of strategies, and they all pivot on one really critical legal idea. This concept right here, substantial transformation. This is the entire battleground. It's this legal gray area where this whole high-stakes game is played. And the core question is this: when does a product, made with parts from China but put together somewhere else, truly become made in Vietnam? Answering that question is worth billions and billions of dollars. And this is where U.S. authorities have really started to draw a line in the sand. They've looked at these specific cases and they've basically said, nope, that's not enough. Just assembling a solar panel from a pre-made Chinese core or welding a pipe from Chinese steel, that doesn't magically change where the product is really from.
So you can really think about this on a spectrum. On one end, you've got outright criminal acts. We're talking low-effort, high-risk fraud. But then on the other end, you have these massive, capital-intensive corporate strategies. Companies building entire factories just to operate in that legal gray area of substantial transformation.
So, faced with this pretty sophisticated playbook, the U.S. government obviously hasn't just been standing still. It's developed its own counter-strategy, a two-pronged enforcement approach. That's basically like a defensive double team. Let's take a look at how it works. Okay, think of it like this. First, you've got the Department of Commerce, or DOC. They're the wide net. They investigate an entire product category, like all solar panels from Vietnam, and they set the rules for everybody. Then you have Customs and Border Protection, the CBP. They're the tactical spear. They go after the specific companies that are breaking those rules. So one agency sets the rules of the game, and the other one enforces them on the ground. So that's the theory. Now let's see how these rules, these players, and these strategies all clash in the real world. And we're going to start with one of the biggest battlegrounds out there, the solar industry. This timeline really tells the whole story. It is a classic cat and mouse chase across the map. So in 2012, the US puts up a wall against China. What happens? The industry immediately pivots to Taiwan. So in 2014, the US extends the wall to Taiwan. So what does the industry do? It makes an even bigger move, shifting final assembly to 4 different countries in Southeast Asia. For every move the government makes, the industry makes a countermove. The data here is, well, it's stunning. Seriously, look at these numbers. In 2011, before all the tariffs, China was the dominant supplier. By 2024, its share drops to basically zero. So where did all that business go? Well, it was almost perfectly absorbed by 4 other countries: Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and Cambodia. And these just happened to be the exact places Chinese firms moved their assembly operations. This is not a coincidence, folks. This is the statistical smoking gun. But then you get a political twist. To avoid disrupting clean energy goals here in the U.S., the White House paused any new tariffs from these Southeast Asian countries for 2 years.
And the result? A massive import frenzy. Everybody rushed to get their panels in before the deadline, creating this huge supply glut that crashed prices. And ironically, it ended up hurting the very American companies the original tariffs were designed to help. It's a perfect example of how complex and full of unintended consequences this whole game can be.
And this pattern isn't just limited to solar panels. We see the exact same playbook in the steel and aluminum industries. The trade data tells the story perfectly. As U.S. tariffs on Chinese steel went up, China suddenly became the #1 source of steel going into Vietnam and Mexico. And at the exact same time, Vietnam and Mexico became top suppliers of steel coming into the United States. It's the same strategy, just with a different product. But then we get to the far, far end of the spectrum, and we have garlic. Here, the tariff has been in place for 30 years, and it is so incredibly high that the game changes completely. It is no longer about legal gray areas, it's about outright criminal fraud. We're talking about people labeling containers of garlic as apples, creating shell companies that literally disappear after one shipment, and risking serious prison time for it. So this constant cat-and-mouse game isn't just a series of isolated cases. No, it's forcing a fundamental shift in the very rules of global trade. We're moving away from an era of just trusting a label. So what does this new playbook look like? Well, first, the game is getting a lot more serious. The response isn't just a few cases from commerce or customs anymore. We are seeing a systemic, government-wide crackdown involving Congress and even a new trade fraud task force at the Department of Justice. And this brings us to what is maybe the most crucial takeaway of all. We are witnessing a fundamental shift in the entire philosophy of global trade. For decades, the system basically ran on trust. You trusted the label that said, "Made in Vietnam." But now, the entire system is shifting from trust to verification. The burden of proof is no longer on the government to find fraud, it's now on the importer to prove their entire supply chain is legit.
Which leaves us with a final and pretty provocative thought. As this new era of verification really takes hold, and as supply chains face this kind of intense scrutiny, what does a label like Made in Vietnam truly mean anymore? Is it a statement of fact, or is it just the next move in the game?